Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah or the Pentateuch, the fifth book of the Bible. So the word Deuteronomy means second law or copy of the law. So keep in mind that Deuteronomy, as we've said, sort of goes with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, the first four. And this Deuteronomy ends as sort of the fifth one in the set. And the Deuteronomy, when you read through it, it reads a little bit like a treaty, like almost like a war treaty. God says, "I will do this," and Israel says, "And we will do that." We make a deal together. Um, but the word means second law or copy of the law. So very early on, what it says is this: beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this law. So to take Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Numbers, and expound upon it, interpret it. And so it's primarily the Israelites are getting close to the promised land, and they know this. This is a continuation of the story. They're getting close to the promised land, and the laws are listed again to them. They'd been wandering, and now they're close to their destination. And so it's not only the law, the way you read it, it's pretty clear. It's not only just the law, do this, do that, but it's preached. So there's a number of little sermonettes in here from Moses. It's not just meant to, command people, but also to convince them. Um, Listen to the tone of chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. This is called the Shema. That's the Hebrew word there, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. That's a that is a key verse for Jews in the Old Testament. And it should sound familiar when Jesus was asked by the religious leaders, "What's the most important commandment?" And Jesus says the greatest commandment is exactly that: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and all your strength. The same kind of thing. Jesus didn't pick that up out of nowhere. He took that directly from the Old Testament. And so, kind of the outline for Deuteronomy, there's this introduction and a speech from Moses, sort of this historical recitation of how they got to where they got, their preparation for giving God's law, again, for reiterating it. Why is it important? And then there's the law itself. Um, Finally, a covenant. So here's the law. Here's why it's important. Now make this covenant. There's going to be blessings or curses depending on how if you follow this or not. And then finally, the Deuteronomy ends in the last couple chapters with Moses, the people preparing for Moses to die and for Moses finally dying. That's kind of an outline of Deuteronomy, roughly. And so then there's this question about, well, did Moses write Deuteronomy? Um, and so because this is all it's attributed to Moses, unless Moses had a crystal ball, at the very least, he didn't write the end of it because it talks about his own death, and you can't really write about your own death, right? Um, Interesting little nugget. The kind of the core of the actual law being given. Remember this law that is trying to convince, to persuade. The way it's worded, the tone of it is a persuasive tone. Uh, it appears to match King Josiah's reform, and you can read about that in 2 Kings 22 and 23. And so, if it matches that reform, uh, hundreds of years after the events supposedly took place, then the naturally arising question is, okay, was Deuteronomy an addition to the Torah? Did it come in after um, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers? Well, maybe. And so the next question is then do you put Deuteronomy do you take it out of the Torah and call it one of the historical books? Because it is historical, right? It is retelling the law, but there is a sort of historical narrative. They did this, then they did that. Do you push that into Joshua and Judges, which are clearly historical and not in the Torah? Does it belong in that group? Um, we'll say from an academic perspective, maybe you could make that argument. From a devotional perspective, no. It is part of the Torah. Uh, and you can make the academic argument, but it's part of the Torah. That's sort of the rebuttal to that. And so that's Deuteronomy. I know it was kind of a really quick run through, but uh, it's a nice little in between kind of transition. They're getting into the promised land. That we transition from Torah, from law to history, and we'll get into history in the next video.